Good morning. Thank you all for coming out early. Welcome to our second talk on cybersecurity this fall. I think you'll agree we have a distinguished speaker, someone with a unique perspective. I want to recognize our partners on the event, the Ken Kennedy Institute for Information Technology here at Rice, Rice's Computer Security Lab, and for the first time, the Greater Houston Partnership. We're really proud to be working with the partnership on the cybersecurity issue. It means that this is an issue that's going to really grab hold on the city agenda for the region beyond Houston. So why should we care about this? Why are we talking about cybersecurity? We're in Houston. We're not in Silicon Valley. We're not even Austin. That's where the computer people live. That's where the hardware is designed. Why should we care about cyber infrastructure? Isn't that Washington's business? They'll come up with something for us and tell us what to do. That's how it works. And I answer that with a resounding no. I can go on great lengths about Houston, the city where 17 railroads meet the sea, the tremendous economic strength of the city. But we need to stay focused on our cyber infrastructure. This is something that doesn't get a lot of attention here. And many of the answers for our most pressing issues in healthcare, energy, education are going to be found in how we use IT. So we know we have to use it, and we know it's insecure. We're bombarded by messages all the time. Yesterday I saw in the Wall Street Journal someone saying we're vulnerable because the Chinese are going to do this, and I'll talk a little bit about the Chinese. But we need to confront these realities rather than merely accept them as boogeyman threats. And this is a big reason why General Meyerrose's talk today will be so instructive. Last week we had Fran Allen here. Fran, I just want to digress briefly, and I will get to the introductory remarks and read the General's incredibly long CV. Although he compressed a lot of jobs, 23 moves and not many more years of career. So it's a chronological. So Fran Allen was here from IBM last week. Fran is the only living female Turing Award winner, the Nobel Prize in computer science, basically. She's been at IBM for over 50 years. And we talked about challenges a lot, and she said, well, I'm really more interested in answers. And she said, what about, and we got talking about multi-core, and I think most of the people in this room are probably familiar with multi-core computing. You don't buy a computer because it's clocked up to X.X gigahertz or X 100 gigahertz or whatever, or megahertz. You buy for cores now. And this means software has to change. So computers aren't marketed the same way they used to be. And what she pointed out is this may represent a really important opportunity, that we're going to have to rewrite a lot of software now to deal with this base reality of how the computer works. I was very interested in this. I really thought about it for the past week, and I said, well, I need to read more. We've got a blank sheet. We might be able to do some interesting things on really bringing security to the heart of the hardware. Wow, that would be a novel solution. And so I looked for papers, and the first edited volume of papers I found was written by a group of academics from the People's Republic of China. So China's thinking about this. We can worry about China. We can look at China as a partner. I'm not going to stoke the fires of a new Cold War with China here today. But China is what we think about in cyber when we think big picture. They're the peer competitor. But, here, these stories, they affect us in some way. But, folks here, many of them are systems administrators, security officers. Cyber war stories about Russia or China, not the day-to-day business. They're waging a daily struggle in the trenches, meeting these expectations for reliability, integrity, and accountability. And accountability is no trivial aspect. And whenever we talk about any sort of new legislation, it's, oh boy, another report I'm going to have to fill out for Uncle Sam. No good for me. But at the end of the day, the security folks need to accept that IT is about connecting individuals, ideas, and information. You have to deliver information to where it needs to go to make decisions. You can't shut the door as much as you want to, and there are many days where IT professionals, many bad days where you just want to pull the plug and say, to heck with it. We're hosed. And this challenge of getting information delivered to where it should go to make good decisions, this is something General Meyerrose knows a lot about. As the Chief Information Officer to the Director of National Intelligence, Mr. Meyerrose accepted the risk of changing the organizational culture of the intelligence community from one of need to know to need to share, and in a secure format. We had a chat last night about YouGov, which is the email for connecting the intelligence community to, say, Harris County cops in our intel unit here, and we both agreed we liked it a lot. He likes it more than anyone because it was his baby. We'd like to see it survive. It's good for Houston. It's good for our region. It will make for good Homeland Security decisions going forward. I hope the DNI changes their mind. Mr. Meyerrose has a lengthy CV, extremely distinguished. He's currently the Vice President and General Manager of Cyber and Information Assurance for the Harris Corporation. He leads all aspects of the strategy, business development, and program execution for Harris's cyber and information assurance initiatives. He also oversees the Center for Information Assurance at the Florida Institute of Technology. It's down the road, I guess, from their Melbourne headquarters. He has more than 3 decades of military service in communications, information technology, intelligence, command and control, and space support. Most recently, he was the first President-appointed Senate-confirmed Chief Information Officer and Information Sharing Executive, key point in the title, for the U.S. intelligence community in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Ambassador Negroponte will be here tomorrow. So you worked for him for a while, didn't you? Yeah, and then we could tell stories about Pat Kennedy. While on active duty, he was Chief Information Officer of 3 major U.S. Air Force commands and 3 Unified Combatant Commands, the COCOMs. He retired from the Air Force in 2005 with the rank of Major General. His last assignment was the Chief Information Officer for both NORAD and the U.S. Northern Command at Peterson Air Force Base. During his career, he received the Distinguished Service Medal, the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, and the National Intelligence Superior Service Medal, among other decorations and recognitions. He graduated from the U.S. Air Force Academy with a BS in Economics, has an MBA from the University of Utah, and he graduated from the National War College and attended senior executive programs at the Kennedy School at Harvard and the University of California's Berkeley Haas School of Business, as well as the National Defense University and the Air University. Most importantly, Mr. Meyerrose is a visiting professor at the School of Information Studies at Syracuse University, which is my alma mater. So good connection back to the Orange, which has a slightly better football team than Rice, only slightly. He's also the chairman of the Cyber Committee for the International Armed Forces Communications Electronics Association, which I always just call AFCEA. And that concludes his CV. So please help me welcome the Honorable Dale Meyerrose to the podium.
Well, thanks very much for that kind introduction. Wish my mom were here to hear it. She'd be impressed too. No, I'm very humbled to be here. It's my first time in Rice since the mid-'70s when I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy. And you've changed a little bit. You've got a few new buildings around, and it's very lovely. And again, I'm very, very pleased to be here. In talking to some of you before we started this morning, I'm really conflicted as to whether or not I'm teaching school, I'm giving a policy discussion, or we're going to talk about industrial applications of an expanding new industry. And since I don't know which to do, I'll probably do just a little bit of all three. And hopefully that will tweak somebody's interest. And then I will try and spend more time answering questions than I do about espousing points. And so if we can have that format, I'll go on for about 15 or 20 minutes. So that ought to give somebody the opportunity to think about what you want to talk about, and you can ask me any question that you like, and then I'm free to give any answer I like, and if there's a correlation between your question and my answer, then all the better, right? I am looking forward to the discourse, because just by the nature of questions, even when you ask something that I think I know, sometimes the way in which you ask it or the way in which the discussion ensues, I always pick up a nuance and a bit of understanding that I didn't have before the interaction. So again, I encourage you to all do that. you could start anywhere in history when you're talking about cyber. Now, probably 1783 is a little too early, but that was when our Continental Army was disbanded, by the way, on this date in 1783. And so it was from this date in 1783 until 1789 we were without an army. Only time in our history, which is kind of interesting. But cyberspace is probably got most of its origins in our military. And the reason I say that is if you look at the terminology that we use when you talk about cyberspace, we've carried over that terminology. We talk about computer network defense and computer network attack and computer network exploitation and common operational and things that are military kinds of terms have come to be everyday terminology within cyberspace. And to some degree that's unfortunate because it gives you the idea that we're talking about a militaristic domain. But in fact, we're talking about a domain that is blurred. And it blurs all kinds of things. The difference between military and civilian, it blurs. It blurs the business between national and international. Particularly since cyberspace has no borders. So where are the legal jurisdictions associated with how we address cyberspace? There are other terms in cyberspace that have been borrowed, if you will, from the IT business. We still, most of us still have mice on our desk. Yeah, if you think about it. But the transition of turning that language from the network IT business, I think that revolution in cyberspace probably started about 12 years ago. And probably the single most significant disruption that we had in technology was not a disruption in technology, but a disruption in how we use technology. It's when two PhD students from Stanford University who couldn't spell Google created a company. True statement. They thought they were coining the word GOOGOL, which stands for 10 to the 100th power. But evidently they don't teach spelling at Stanford, and so they came up with... And in fact, if you look at the four technologies in which they combined to create their company in 1998, every one of those technologies have been around for 10 years. But the combination, the application, was so disruptive that a mere 8 years later, the name Google found its way into the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And now there is not a single technologist anywhere who would think about designing a system or putting together information or even talking about anywhere in this technology without taking, either the concepts of Google or the company Google into account. We've had several other disruptions, not as dramatic, which in essence lead me to the following conclusion. Cyber is a domain with familiar terminology and unfamiliar paradigms and definitions. And they're still evolving. And so, how do you address something that has no set definition but seems to be dominating much of what we do? Okay, so I'm about to end my teaching portion of my presentation. And that is something that my grad students at Syracuse have a hard time dealing with, because to them everything that I've talked about in the last 10 to 12 years is ancient history in their mind. Because we're not talking about Gen X, Gen Y. I call them Gen Zs. These are the folks with no memory past 1995. And it is indeed changing what we do and how we think. The thing that seems to dominate a lot of the discussions in cyberspace is the term cybersecurity. And again, it is the business of that seems to pose a threat, and so that is what we focus our attention to. And usually in the national press, we only focus the attention if we can attribute some dastardly deed and demonize some source as we're getting at the crux of what is bad. When in fact, we have millions, if not billions, of cyber attacks, cyber intrusions, cyber bad things happening every day of the week. And so it is very hard for us to have a national discourse on things that just seem to only revolve around a couple lightning rods a year, like the 4th of July attacks on public websites, anytime Twitter gets attacked or some prominent named element, and of course we look to demonize the source of how that came about. So why should we have the discourse anyway? Many of you probably know that almost 90% of our critical infrastructure in the United States is in private ownership. Not in government hands, but in private ownership. But what role should the government have with regard to critical infrastructure? What role should those who own the critical infrastructure, operate the critical infrastructure, what responsibilities do they have? And here is the primary difference of why it's more important to talk in terms of cyber and not in terms of networks. It's called our citizenry. Because that is fundamentally what is different about the IT technology of 10 years ago and the technology of today. Because our citizenry is wrapped up in it. The business about how our citizenry gets services and how you act and behave, social network, the whole 9 yards. That is a fundamental difference between the network age and the cyber age, which I believe that we're firmly in. And so a lot of the things that we grew up believing in the IT business about how you provided services, how you did security, and all those other kinds of things, our terms are still there, but the definitions have shifted out from under us. I got in trouble with my mom about 3 months ago because one of the national media folks ran an article, and they quoted me as saying that my mom was probably one of the most noted cyber terrorists in the United States. And it's true, she is. She didn't like me saying that. She said, but anyway, I won't get into that. And none of you are going to call her up because I won't give you but you'll find, But now, why did I say that she's a cyber terrorist? When in fact, all she does is email. That's the only thing she does. But she's a cyber terrorist. The reason is because she will open anything. She will forward anything. And every time number one son goes back home, I clean her computer of bots. Because she is such a very basic user, her machine becomes an instrument that is leveraged and used by other machines completely without her knowledge. And the most sophisticated thing she can do is if her internet connection is too slow, she knows how to turn off her virus checker to help improve makes her a cyber terrorist. And it doesn't matter what her intent is. So every one of us who touch cyberspace are a user and a consumer. We're also a threat, an attacker, a defender, and a source of vulnerability and exploitation, all at the same time, all the time. Irrespective of what your intent is. And so for you technologists in the room that think that, we need to build higher walls and dig deeper moats around computer and IT systems, you got the wrong word. How do you address things that are so omnipresent like that? The ubiquity of cyberspace is what distinguishes it from other domains of experience. Because it is, if you kind of stretch the idea of space being a domain, but if you kind of limit the other domains of, air, land, sea, cyberspace is the only domain that has no fixed size. Because every time a new person touches it, cyberspace gets bigger. So it's really, the thing that is really tough about cyberspace is coming up with meaningful analogies so we can understand large numbers which may be meaningless in cyberspace. Many of you probably read and heard of the government sites that were attacked over the 4th of July. And you probably saw numbers that were just astounding if you bothered to read. And they were numbers that you would, put a power of 10 with double digits or even triple digits as the exponential number. And yet, that whole thing could have been done by one or two people. Because cyberspace has become the asymmetric avenue of choice of attack of not only enemies of the United States, but also of elements of crime. When you don't have the power, you can resort to cyberspace and exert an extraordinary amount of power with small numbers and not necessarily sophisticated technology. Back to the idea that we're talking about blurring lots of things. So, it's with us. It's here to stay. And so what kind of implications are that? I think the first set of implications have to do with what kind of responsibilities and accountability ought to be in cyberspace. Is there an inalienable right to connect to cyberspace? The analogy I come up with is there an inalienable right to drive on the highway? May not be a perfect analogy, but again, it's the idea that citizenry has a huge role in cyberspace. Many of you probably read the Washington Post released article from over the weekend where the particulars of some internal investigations of members of Congress got hacked, if you will, and released and became open press of what was supposed to be for official use only, internal government, inspector general kinds of information. How'd that happen? Well, the principal reason it happened was that an individual who had legitimate access either did an ignorant act, a stupid act, or a surreptitious act, all depending upon what their intent was, in making it easily findable in cyberspace and easily accessible. And they may not have had that intent whatsoever. It got put out on a peer-to-peer sharing piece of software that was easily interceptable, easily readable. And in fact, we ended up with what was supposed to be closely guarded inspector information being leaked out to the public and maybe putting in jeopardy collection of legal evidence and putting in jeopardy the audit and the inspection itself. 70% of all bad things that happen in cyberspace are done by insiders, people who are authorized members of your network, people who would normally have access to do something, but they do something stupid, they do something out of ignorance, or they do something out of frustration because the IT folks don't employ the latest and greatest type of technology so I can get my job done. And we've all done it. I email myself in my civilian account because it's easier to print something off of another printer than it is the printer that my IT services support folks give me. Anybody ever done that? I don't need a show of hands because there might be cameras running. See, so it's again this ubiquity that makes cyberspace and how we have used it a very changed environment for us to deal with. So we have to think about what's the proper role of government. I would tell you, after having been working in this business in the federal government for over 3 decades, that our legal structure is not geared to handle it. Where's cyber jail? What does a cyber warrant look like? Where's the lines of jurisdiction for prosecution or defense? All kinds of things. And if you look at the elements in which we have prosecuted people for cyber type crimes, it reverts back to some existing piece of law that has to do with something physical. It's kind of like us getting Al Capone for tax evasion rather than for crime. It's the same kind of idea. Cyberspace is one that mostly has de facto standards. Okay, so is it the role of our government to provide real enforceable standards? Just like, maybe we do for our transportation system, portions of our energy system. Okay, if I am a cyber provider, what responsibilities and accountability do I have? Do I have responsibilities to police what I pass or what I host? Now, of course, that sounds very, civil rights this or civil rights that, but let me introduce a new word here that I know you all know. We don't necessarily know what it means, but malware. So if I'm an IP provider and I just host whatever is given to me, do I have a responsibility to keep my site clean of malware? And then back to my mom. How do we connect with our citizenry so that they become responsible cyber pedestrians or responsible cyber drivers? So it's very, very, it has quickly gotten out of the technology realm and very much into the sociology realm, in some degree the psychology realm. Because as soon as we hear the word cyber, we immediately conjure up some images, such as we must be talking something techie, such as we got to be talking about those folks who like to live in basements with Coke bottle glasses without social lives, who got nothing better to do than to do Second Life on a computer. We automatically think probably of rooms with, all kinds of boxes with red lights and green lights and big, and all those other kinds of things. I firmly believe that every element of technology that we will see manifest itself in the next 10 years is already known somewhere. It might be in a lab, it might be, in some company's offerings or whatever. But every piece of technology that will manifest itself in the cyber world is already known for the next 10 years. What is not known is how we're going to use it and what kind of disruption that will provide. And will that be a disruption on the order of maybe a Google? Or will it be a series of slow changing things and all of a sudden 5 years later you wake up and we all know what Twitter means, don't we? Everybody know that Twitter has only come about in the last 36 months? And now it's a noun, it's a verb, it's an it's an adjective, and it's a state of mind, isn't it? And in fact, Twitter is about 1970s, maybe 1980s technology. But it took until now to manifest itself into a disruptive influence in our society that now brings along with it good things and it brings along with it other things. And that's what's happening across the board with regard to cyberspace. I know that, Chris talked about me moving 23 times. I just moved for my last time. The reason I know is my wife threw away her Yadro boxes and my stereo boxes from the 1970s. And when we moved into a house that does not have a phone line. And whether you know it or not, a lot of our Gen X and Gen Y folks don't have phone lines. My phone service is bundled with my TV service and with my network service, and also with some of my utilities. So what makes us think that if how things are presented to me in bundled services and things like that in just the very basic parts of life doesn't mean that there are huge changes in either industry or things that support industry in the business of cyber? For those of you that grew up in the security business are probably very, very disturbed that I've talked for 12 and a half minutes and have yet to talk about security as being a major force of cyber. In fact, I've talked about it as an infrastructure element. Because the elements of security, of building the higher wall, digging the deeper moat, of how we've traditionally approached these kinds of things in a network sense is why we're in the predicament we are today. And I believe it was Einstein said, if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. And so talking about something as important as security and cybersecurity and information assurance, which, oh, by the way, only has definition in 2 elements of our U.S. government, probably is, like I talked at the beginning, we got a bunch of familiar sounding terms, but the definitions and the paradigms underneath those terms have all changed. And we need to think of things like cloud computing. Now, cloud computing, for you technologists know, the ideas of cloud computing have been around since quantum computing started being introduced about a half a dozen years ago, maybe 8 years ago. And now you see all kinds of commercials on TV about cloud computing. And so there must be a good, solid definition, and everybody who's really in on it knows what cloud computing means, and all the rest of us are stupid and ignorant. Familiar term, shifting definition. And if you haven't figured out, that's the 4th time I've said it during this presentation, because I'm trying to make sure that wherever I go that we realize that when we hear some of these things, the frame of reference and how it's put together is different, and therefore how we need to solve it will be different. Hosted services, cloud storage, cloud computing, all of those elements, familiar terms, existing technology, unfamiliar definition and paradigms. We're going to hear more things about trusted source. And a couple areas that I think we're going to hear about them in have to do with critical infrastructure and protection. I think we'll hear it in the following 3 areas more than any other, the idea of trusted source. Our banking and financial, our healthcare, and our energy. And again, it will play out in ways in which we've not thought about. Element of banking. We could talk about in terms of the Wall Street and, major institutions and element like that and things like that. But we got those pesky citizens at their ATM machines. It's every bit as much a part of that ecosystem having to do with the financial industry as any bank. And so those kind of transactions, along with the transactions done by the Federal Reserve, done by major banks and companies and all those kinds of things, it's all part of the same chain. And if you don't address it as such, then it becomes the asymmetric attack of choice for crime. And by the way, we tend to marginalize, in my view, a lot of discussions about cybersecurity by talking about the teenager in the basement or the student in the dorm room. I believe that accounts for less than 5% of what we got to worry about. And I think the single biggest thing you have to worry about has to do with criminal activity. And criminals that take advantage of Madonna Meyerrose being an unsophisticated cyber user is just one example. Or get a disgruntled employee who doesn't lose access at the point they become disgruntled or fired. You know, the 2 or 3 examples that I've cited that you read about in the press, none of that was done by some foreign nation or some extremist. That was a result of either carelessness or somebody being intentionally careless, who probably walks down the street and looks just like you and me. In the healthcare business, if you look about what the discourse is about healthcare, it normally falls along 2 lines. Well, of course, who pays for it's the third line, the third rail of all discussions, I guess. But it's the element of access, and we typically think in terms of access of can you see a doctor, but that access also has a technical means to it, as in who has access to your personal health records. And can you get subject matter expertise virtually on your case, your illness, your disease, your condition through cyberspace? We normally think of health records as being those pieces of paper that have the scribbles that look like the doctor didn't go to college in the first place or didn't pass 3rd grade writing in the first place. That's what we normally conceive of health records, isn't it? But in fact, the healthcare industry is much like the rest of the cyber industry in that data and records are not going to be documents with words on them, but in fact going to be pictures. X-rays, MRIs. And if you think about the capacity needed to store, transmit, and share those kinds of things, it's a lot different than passing a 7 kilobyte file that is a letter of 2 paragraphs. And in fact, in cyberspace, the nature of data is going to be fundamentally changed. That I believe within the next 3 years, over 90% of all data will be something other than the written word. So again, I'm not talking about new technology. I'm talking about how we're using it, how we're thinking about it. You know, you often hear many times the comparison of the size of the Library of Congress. You know, and if you've ever been there, it is you know, in my mind, the 4th most impressive building in Washington, D.C. It's huge, and you can stand up on the galleries and you can see thousands upon thousands of volumes. And we often use that as a measure of comparison to say that something is large or something is hard to understand or whatever. In fact, we have movable storage devices, which many of us call thumb drives, that can store the entire content of the Library of Congress on a thumb drive. So tell me again how that is a good reference for size in the cyber world. And so the business about streaming video and video can't you see we've got lots of sensors, we've got a lot of recording devices out there, and that information's going somewhere, and it's not all going to be on YouTube. And besides, if you're a YouTube watcher, you got to watch it on your own personal computer because 75% of the government organizations in the United States block YouTube as a source that their folks can browse, which I don't agree with either. In any event, hopefully that gave you some things to think about, and I'll close with narrowing in on the energy industry, and again, there's a term that we get tossed a lot about, and it's called the smart grid. And many of us know the basic elements of the smart grid, but I think again it's a matter of we don't know how that's going to play out. because there is the cyber which allows you to efficiently produce energy. Then there's the cyber which allows you to efficiently access energy. And so there's a consumer side to energy that is more than you being able to plug in your iron in the wall. Because if anything, cyber ends up being about choice, doesn't it? Choice by organizations, choice by companies, choice by individuals. And it's a choice we've kind of gotten used to in a very short period of time. How long ago would it be inconceivable that every hotel door would have a computer or processor in it? And yet now it's unusual to find a hotel door that doesn't have a computer or processor in it. How long ago did you get your first cell phone that you carried with you all the time? And then it became a PDA, a personal digital assistant. Okay, to the uninitiated, what is a personal digital assistant? You're looking for somebody who's walking behind you. The technology of that is not new. The business about how we buy and sell music. And yet the music industry is still predicated upon a 99-cent 45 RPM record. In the business about iPhones and iPods and all that's all brand new technology, right? No, 1979 was when the first element of listening to music and a small digital content was created. But it wasn't until Apple, about 4 years ago, combined it with personal computer technology, storage and compression, created something that made Apple the second largest retailer of music in the world. Second only to Walmart. So where are all those record label companies and things like that in the business of that part of their industry? I think it's very telling that they still talk about going gold on your record. And there's not been an artist cut a record in the last 20 years. And so that is kind of my analogy for where we are in other parts of thinking about cyber. It's a matter of efficiency. It's a matter of choice. It's a matter of productivity. But it's also a matter of protection, security, personal civil rights, all kinds of things that we've not thought about in those ways before. The story I often tell about people that are so swept up in this idea about protecting identity. Big deal, right? So why do you go to your grocery store and not only give away your identity, but give away all your personal habits to get a nickel off of an orange? And that's what you do when you get those little shopper cards. What are they doing? They're tracking your habits. In fact, I've got one. My name's Joe Bag of Donuts. My telephone number is 555-111-2222. I live in Venus, Virginia. And yet, Safeway doesn't care. But whoever that is, they're tracking their And literally, that is who I am. I'm Joe Bag of Donuts. I didn't give him my real name, didn't give him a real address, didn't give him a real phone number. But they've got the identity of somebody out there that they know how many gallons of milk I buy a week, they know how many oranges I buy, and they give me a nickel off of it. And yet, how many of our citizenry do that, knowingly, not realizing that what they're doing is they're compromising not only their identity, but their personal habits. So again, the disruption is how we think about and solve cyber issues and most of them are not necessarily technology related, although technology can help. And again, most of our technological advances in the IT business for the past half dozen years have been more a combination of existing technology in a new way with new sets of products, which is how my company is approaching the idea of cyber, and many other companies, rather than looking for the silver bullet. Because everything that touches cyberspace that provides a capability one way provides a threat vector vulnerability coming back. And that's the nature of cyberspace. Okay. Hopefully I've been provocative enough that that it will stimulate a question or two. And I'll continue answering questions until either there's a long pregnant pause or there's nobody left to answer questions. It's not often I have a captive audience like this because most of my students, you know, the second the hour hand gets to the top, they're walking out whether I'm done speaking or not. and if you would, just for the courtesy of your colleagues and to see if I can pass the test at the end of the day, please state who you are and who your affiliation is, and then we'll broadcast your identity over the internet. No. Sir.
I'm Sam Stubbs. I'm a lawyer.
Yes, sir. A corporate lawyer,
Suits over money.
Okay. You're my kind of guy.
Joe Bag of Donuts gets his life history known through the Safeway store. And
Right.
The store uses that data and information for marketing purposes. Who else has access to Joe Bag of Donuts' information?
That's a superb question. And what you need to do is, and of course everybody hates this, but the small print of the little document you sign for Safeway, it says that under certain conditions that they can sell their list of habits and patrons and things like that to other businesses who would like to do, you know, who would again like to track things so that they can work marketing deployments and all those kinds of things. This is one area that I find our legislative acumen to be very, very lacking, and that this is an area that I I'm not a one for a lot of government intervention after working for the government for 38 years. You might understand that. But this is an area where I think there is some public responsibility that needs to lay out basic guidelines about what Safeway can do with your information with or without your knowledge. And again, you sign up for virtually anything in cyberspace. What most of us don't know is you create a cookie. And there are a series of cookies. Some of them are tracking cookies. Some of them are cookies that stay in your computer that, you know, makes it easier to get back to certain places. And somebody places a bad cookie intended to do bad things like they do on my mom's machine all the time. You know, all of a sudden transforms, what I do irrespective of what my intent is. But that's an area where I do believe that the political process does need to help us out.
Does anybody in the government get Joe Bag of Donuts' information?
Well, which government are you talking about? If you're talking about the government of China, then they're probably getting it, but we wouldn't trust our own government with it, but we'll give it to China. And a little bit of a sarcastic remark there. Again, this can't be a great idea because I've espoused it for a couple years now and nobody's jumped on it. Just like Safeway, I would sign a document that would allow my government to collect information. They collect information on me, all of us, all the time anyway, but they can't share it. And you give me 5% less on my taxes, and I'll sign a document that allows you to collect it one time and you can share it and you can save a whole bunch of money for the U.S. government. And it's the same idea. It's the same idea. But for the most part, the Privacy Act of 1974, the E-Government Act of 2002 limit very much the information that can be shared between government agencies. So if the tax IRS collects information on you, they cannot share that with the FBI except under certain legal constraints. They can't share it with Department of Agriculture or whatever. So if the Department of Agriculture needs to collect consumer information, they have to create a whole separate infrastructure in which to do it. And there are very limited sharing between U.S. government agencies having to do with U.S. citizens, and there's an entire body of law that is wrapped up in that. And as in my last 3 years, I came face to face with this a lot. And how do you treat a terrorist? A known terrorist in Iran shows up inside the borders of the United States. They now have a different legal status. And so the ability to share that foreign gathered intelligence done by the intelligence community of the Department of Defense with a domestic law enforcement is very, very difficult. And that's the way we've chosen to do it. Sir.
Joe Bag of Donuts pay for his groceries?
With a credit card, because their system is not sophisticated enough to align with who pays for it with who placed the order.
Trust that? I claim you've got a linkage to everything that way.
Sure, you probably do. To some degree. But the element of what Safeway can legally do, Joe Bag of Donuts signed the agreement with how they can use that information. There's another set of laws which govern how they can use your credit card information, which is more restrictive. But you're right. The fact that you do. This is why I always think this is funny. How many of your IT security folks make you change your password every 60 days? Yeah, it's stupid. It is because in the cyber world, if you do something the same way twice, it's trackable and traceable, and it's auditable. So the fact that you use your password every day for 60 days and then you change it, and 2 days later, the same people can track who. It really is. But it makes us feel better. We're being secure because we're doing something. We are. Your users are actually doing something. Good point though. Back here on the far left.
My name is Sean Graham. I'm a student here at Rice University.
What year are you?
I'm a senior.
Senior? What's your major?
Cognitive science.
Okay, good.
We had touched.
Where are you from?
From Corpus Christi, Texas.
Corpus Christi. Okay, good. I'm always curious about students. Forgive me. I mean, it's the professor in me. Sir, please.
We just talked about it or touched on it in the last couple questions on, I guess, handling the sharing of this information. Because while the laws for collection of the information are kind of set, now with Fusion Center efforts and other, I guess, efforts to streamline the interagency cooperation from both federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, they now have, I guess, they've been tasked with keeping us safe by utilizing certain information, such as the Safeway's records for Joe Bag of Donuts.
Right.
So now that they have the permission to collect this information, the laws for sharing it aren't really there between the local law enforcement agencies.
Excellent point.
Enforcement agencies. So I'm just curious what's being done to make sure that our privacy is protected. Now that everyone has permission to collect, but no one has really decided who has permission.
Sure. And that's a good question. And I'll give you a little bit of our sarcastic answer. And that little bit of our sarcastic answer is that there have been about 25 bills introduced in committee in the United States Congress during the period of time that I served with the last administration, all aimed at that, and not a single one of them got out of committee. And they didn't get out of committee for all kinds of reasons. Either the committee got busy doing something else, this didn't seem to be an urgent priority, there was some complication that made it hard to reach a compromise. But there have been several attempts. There are 3 major cyber laws pending that have gotten some committee endorsement that many of us who spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill believe that at least one of those will see the light of the day shortly after the first of next year, which will address some of that. But with most legislation, there's enough ambiguity that reasonable people can take different interpretations from it. which is why we need to employ lots of lawyers. Sir, I have a hand back up against the...
My name is Stan Druck. I'm president of First Computer Corporation.
Yes, sir.
My question is about the private sector. Other than Harris Corporation, what company is doing the most about cybersecurity?
Boy, that's a little bit tough to answer. Because as someone who was a senior official in government, from my perspective, I could not pick a leader, and so that's what several of our companies are realizing, that the barrier to entry to be the best right now is fairly low because you don't have to knock anybody off the top to be there. I think what we're finding is that we have a lot of niche providers in the security business that are finding new places in the cyber security business, different from the computer security business. And so those niche providers, I think the big fish are looking to gobble up, and which is why you've probably seen many of our corporations buy companies. We are looking to incorporate that niche provisioning that is not a normal part of our intellectual property that we have. And so the companies that I might say publicly, I'm sure that almost nobody in this room would recognize. However, my company has thrown our lot in with McAfee in a very big, overt way for a couple of reasons. As of last quarter, McAfee became the single largest provider of security software to corporations in the world for the first time last quarter. That was because 2.5 years ago, McAfee started on an idea that said that computer security and cyber security are going to be two different things. And so we need to figure out how to get into the service provisioning cloud business. And so McAfee's been working towards that for about 3 years, and we're the most aggressive in doing so, which is why Harris Corporation and McAfee married up. And in fact, we are looking to provide several offerings which will be fundamentally different than the computer security, load this piece of software and you've got a moat and a wall around your castle. I think you're going to find our competitors are doing much the same thing, looking for those niche providers that are crossing over out of the computer network security into the business of cybersecurity, which has much more to do with trusted source and data protection than it does protecting the network. And see, again, here's the thing about cyber that's important to remember. It is not done in a network. It's done outside a network, largely done, to some degree. People call it being out in the wild on the internet or whatever. But when you're a company that has a supply chain management issues, you don't do that internally to your company. You go to your supply chain providers and create that efficiency through cyberspace. And so there are about a half a dozen companies that I would give you a name, but some of them we might be thinking about partnering or whatever, and so it would be inappropriate for me to give any specific names other than to say that I'm absolutely confident that, and I keep this dialogue up with my colleagues that are still in office, none of us believe that there's a number one out there, a number two, or there's even a top five.
Is Cisco doing very much in this area?
Cisco is investing a lot in it, and Cisco is trying to figure out and define for us the cloud. But if you watch Cisco, what they define as a cloud is in direct contrast to what IBM is trying to do with cloud-type activities. It's because one's coming at it from a software and the other's coming at it from a switched exchange. And so that is a very direct competition for market share that you'll see play out over the next couple of years, in my view. But Cisco is spending billions of dollars. See, and again, sir, you're in the business, and so you know. But for those of you that don't watch this business a lot, you got to ask yourself, why did Oracle buy Sun? Why did HP buy EDS? Think about that. And why did they do that? They did it because it made a business sense, which is not necessarily apparent to the public at large yet. And I think you're going to see a couple more of those kinds of major acquisitions that involve billions of dollars of exchange of shares, because they're there is a growing recognition that there is an emerging market that is fundamentally different than the IT market of the past 10 years, fundamentally different than the network market of the past 10 years. And so that's what you're going to see. Sir.
Yes, I'm Tyrone Bag of Chips, and I think we may be distant third cousins.
Yeah, you're probably right.
My name is Giovanni Edwards, and I'm with Centerpoint Energy. And I'd be curious to hear more of your thoughts on smart grid technology, what
Sure.
some of the obstacles are to really unleashing the full potential, if you think it's a worthwhile undertaking, and what you see some of the applications and implications for.
Sure. Well, in the first business of provisioning for energy, here's the first thing I see. If you look at how our energy sector has developed control systems so that we could have unmanned stations, most of that is locally developed software, got to a price point, is the switch on or off, and that's about all it does. And so the business about relaying that information to something else to aggregate it to give you a bigger picture doesn't exist. And so the fragmentation, which right now is a little bit of a protection for the energy industry, but won't be in the future, is that we need to really look at how we put those control systems together and have more than one purpose, just unmanning sites and being able to do things remotely so you can cut down on manpower as an objective other than that. Because if you think about it, much, not all, but much of the energy industry is based upon a max production area, and then you step back with regards to either charging or provisioning, for other times of the day, other times of the year, and things like that. That's fairly inefficient. And so I think there are lots of things about how we control the industry that if we network them together, those efficiencies will be found. Network them together, now you've got another set of vulnerabilities that you've got to worry about, because if they're networked together, now there's more potential for somebody to do really something bad. So if you want to do really something good, the flip side of it is you got to protect against something really bad. And so I think there's a lot more good and efficiencies that we can do on the production side that cyber can help with regard to the energy industry. The other thing that's coming into this is that we're going to give consumers choice, and I think that's a great idea. That I can manage what I'm willing to pay for or whatever in my home, and it's not just dependent upon me plugging an iron into the wall and drawing current. In that, I can select energy sources that are, who I want to patronize or how I want to think about consumption of energy and things like that. The element of the smart home is an idea that's been around for years, for decades, and you can go to any one of the Silicon Valley folks that there are about a half a dozen that still have R&D facilities, and they'll walk you into the home of the future. And when you walk into the home of the future, there's all kinds of, it senses when you walk in, it turns the heat up, it turns the heat down just based upon you being there. The chair will adjust based upon, your sensor talking to that sensor that this is my sitting height. The element, what's in the refrigerator, what's on the stove, what's the and all those other kinds of things. Those ideas have been around for a long time. But there'll be a disruption, I think, that will cause all of a sudden a great demand that says, we the consumer want this, and that's where the consumer business and the energy business I think will change and change a lot. Okay, now if you think about it, if you're trying to remote all the consumers that you service into your area, most of them are wireless. So how are you going to do it wireless? Because see, people like me, we don't have phone lines in our homes anymore. And so wireless is more and more a factor of cyber. That provides great capability, provides great vulnerability. So you might think about, I'm going to protect my device physically and software a certain way. I protect my transmission of data, maybe at a different level of protection. So you don't end up with the same level of protection all the time. I have a greater vulnerability when I transmit, therefore I'm going to pay for encryption. Not protection, but encryption in terms of, national security type encryption in a wireless device. Now that's going to drive my price point up. Okay, and again, consumers, I think, for the most part, are very price sensitive, and it's something we run into all the time. My company is largely a defense and intelligence community contractor. We have high-end users that pay prices that the Noblesville Volunteer Fire Department won't pay for radios. Why? Because they can't afford to pay that kind of money for a high-end device, but they still may need high-end kind of protection. And so, again, when you think about the energy business, not everything is going to be protected at the same level. It will go through various levels of protection, all based upon risk, and that risk will be predicated upon a demand consumer, unless we choose to regulate it in some way, shape, or form, which we often do in the energy business. Those are my thoughts on that.
You mentioned a disruption.
Yes.
Would bring about a spike in consumer demand. What do you think that disruption will be?
Well, I think that disruption is going to be that our idea that we've got personal computers with processing right there local, you pay a premium for that. And so I think the disruption will be that we will have more and more devices that will not have processing there, but the processing we will get processing from the cloud, from some hosted service somewhere, and that'll give me a wider range of choices about what kind of programs I use, what kind of applications I use, or whatever. So I think that the disruption will be our continued and accelerated acceptance of what I call dumb terminals. Okay, now the techies will say, oh, we've been down this road between thin client and thick client before, and you don't understand this and you don't understand that, and all that. Yeah, we've been down that road before. But if we take that approach, then we'd still be driving horse and buggies around here. Somebody'd still be making buggy whips, even though there are no sulkies are about the only ones, and sulkies and horse riders are about the only ones that have whips. Sir.
I'm John Worminski, and I guess I'm one of those guys that concern themselves about firewalls, bigger trenches, and that sort of thing.
Yes, sir.
I would like your opinion on the changing landscape of, I don't know what for the lack of any other word, the domain of responsibility for cyberspace. As you talk about the move to the cloud for my computing power at home. I'm going to count on the apps on my cell phone to be able to tell me how to get out of the parking lot to my favorite restaurant. Mm-hmm. I'm going to drop Word and I'm going to go to Google Apps tomorrow. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, this lovely little toy that you in the military tossed out to us from DARPA, 35 years ago or whatever it is, and it's owned 80% by private, mm-hmm. becomes a public responsibility that's now grown beyond. Because I guarantee you've got ICANN and you've got a couple of other key points to which when my business or one of my clients' business is using Oracle financials and J.D. Edwards remote ordering system, when the backbone of this cloud comes to a screeching halt for whatever particular reason,
sure.
My SLA ain't going to be a damn bit of good. Mm-hmm. I can hold all these discussions I want to with MCI or with
sure.
these guys. They're just going to throw their hands up because it's an act of God or an act of something.
Okay.
What is going on at the level of a national security entity?
Sure. Okay, again, it's the idea of how do you treat this as an infrastructure. And let me use an analogy that's in the IT business, and then I'll leapfrog and answer your question. How long ago was it when, like when PCs first came out, and we first started networking them together? If you had a Dell appliance, you had to have Dell throughout the whole thing. Okay, so it wasn't too long after that where it didn't matter whether you put an Icon, a Philips, a Dell, an HP, a homemade computer on the thing, and it works just as right. So it became transparent as to what the end device was.
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you, DARPA, and thank you for IP.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so now we get to the business of we enter into an infrastructure. And my company is one of these that believes that when we offer you a service, we also offer what we would call a disaster recovery or COOP service along with it. See, again, you got to think of cyber just a little bit different in this regard. And I get this from folks all the time. Here's my analogy. I'm going to go to the library and I'm going to check out a book. When I walk out the door of the library with that book, nobody else can have access to that book because I've removed it from the shelves. But when I go to a cyber library and I take a file out, now I can use that file, but that file's still in the library and it can be accessed by any number of other entities or folks. And so what you find with data storage folks like like Terramark and Google and Yahoo and all those other kinds of folks, what they do is you don't find that information in a single place. And I know how they distribute it and all those kinds of things, and that's a proprietary thing. But I can assure you that if there's a piece of information that they're housing, that it's housed in more than one place. And so, do you have the right kind of architecture structure? And I call it a cyber, not a SOA like you would be more comfortable with, a systems operation architecture, but a cyber operations architecture that says that I can experience any one of a number of disruptions anywhere in the cloud, and another part of the cloud picks up that service. If you think about it, our North American telecom grid already does that to some degree. And so what we're doing, if a switching center goes out in Atlanta, another part of the telecom grid picks it up. And that happens every day of the week. There are about 5% of the telecom grid is down at any one time, and you never know it.
Are you talking about data or connectivity?
The two are going to get melded pretty quick in that.
Right.
Sure.
I mean, because the predicament begins to arise that I assert that there becomes a dependency upon the connectivity as
absolutely.
well as the data.
Oh, absolutely.
And that animal grows. It begins to take a life of itself that goes beyond the initial contract or the initial thought. You look at businesses today, and I've got clients across the world. Most of them have data centers, and they consider their data centers to be, their pride and joy. But at the same time, I would say on any given day, 10 to 15% of my clients are now talking about, this is kind of a high price for me to pay. I've got all these people running around keeping my network up, and they're paying old farts like me who once made the networks work. I want to go out and I want to send it to Oracle e-business. Now my data and my connectivity have all of a sudden become one.
Right.
It becomes a very interesting proposition.
Sure it does. But I would say to you that it's no different than if I ran a local area network. My connectivity to the data is dependent. And by the way, when I run my own network, I probably only got one source, and I don't have backup tapes like we used to have in the old days. I've run built networks for 30 years, much along the lines of it's a self-contained network. I've got my own data sources. I've got my own elements and things like that. And there was not a single exception that I didn't improve my availability of not only my service, but also my access to data by going to a much more centralized element. Okay. All right. Let me just swing this way. Sir.
I'm Doug Nelson. I'm with Control Risks, also with a couple other people, members of the local Information System Security Association.
Yes, sir. Good.
My question, I think, it actually expands upon what the previous gentleman asked you in your rights and responsibility aspect. when you said police what you pass, looking at that when you talk about malware, your mother being a terrorist,
right,
and looking at people that actually control the infrastructure.
See, you won't forget my mother's a terrorist. You just won't forget it.
But how do you balance social responsibility with civil rights? I mean, about a month ago we had the chief security officer of AT&T here kind of anecdotally talking about what they can see and see people getting slammed by attacks. And they're just somewhat helpless unless they're asked to kind of intervene and do things. Do we need to empower people at the core backbone of the network with a sense of social responsibility to stop things, to thwart things?
That's an excellent question. And it's one that I struggled with in public life all the time. Because you're looking to establish policies that enable people to do things, but also protect liberties and the Constitution and those kinds of things. And this is where cyber again blurs definitions for us and makes us uncomfortable. What you own versus what I own isn't as defined in cyberspace as it is in real space. And again, this is one where I do believe that there is a public greater good here. That needs some sort of regulation. Okay, now that immediately conjures up all the unfavorable things of bureaucrats. But I would submit to you that if we didn't have some sort of regulation in the broadcast business, we wouldn't have very good TV service. Now you can say whether it's good or bad or inefficient or stepped on this or stepped on that. I think we have to come up with a new frame of reference of public domain. And and right of public domain in cyberspace, which we've not come up with. We wouldn't have roads if we didn't have public domain. And the last, and from I'm a little bit of a student of history, and from my perspective, the last major eminent right of public domain legislation in this country was passed in 1864. Signed by Abraham Lincoln, and it had to do with where the railroads could go, and in fact have created where most of our infrastructure has subsequently grown up in the 19th and 20th and 21st century. And there are all kinds of public domains that we sensationalize, like some family farmer was forced to sell his farm for some development and all. I mean, those are onesies and twosies, and to be concerned with, absolutely. But that's in the realm of all politics or local kinds of things. So you have to think about what politics are of national importance. And I think we need to do the hard problem of struggling with what is the eminent right of public domain in cyberspace. And I don't, from my perspective, I don't see anybody attacking that squarely other than a couple of think tanks. Ma'am.
I'm Ann Rogers with Waste Management.
Yes, ma'am.
Since we have a cyberspace that just encompasses everybody, it's not just us.
Yeah.
I can see us passing whatever laws we want, and people in other realms saying they don't want to go along with it. So it becomes even a bigger challenge than just getting our own act.
Sure, it does. But I would submit to you that in many things you end up with de facto laws because other entities end up being forced to adopt. If you're the 800-pound gorilla in the house, and we are in some things, not in everything. In the technology sectors that support cyberspace, most of which we're not even the top 15 in the world in expertise. But when you're the big elephant in the room, and you follow this, there's a certain amount you can shame. There's a certain amount you can't shame no matter what, and then there's a certain amount that realizes that if I'm going to do business with this, then this is how it's going to be. Again, I can think of instances in my lifetime, just kind of shows you how old I am, of things that became de facto standards before they became legislated standards. Like the three prongs in the plug. See, I grew up in times where they're for a brief while, but the market corrected itself, without legislation. And why did it do that? It did it because that there was motivation in order to do that. I would submit to you that there is treaty work for us to do internationally. And then in some of those hard areas, I would submit where we're the 800-pound gorilla, we can fix a lot of things with leadership. Not everything. And there's always 10% out there that won't do anything regardless. So I promise to go right along here, up there, and then across there. Okay? Sir.
My name is Christian Tan. I'm an auditor. And my question is security-wise.
I didn't do it. You can't prove it. I wasn't even there. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make light of that.
I was wondering, security-wise, how would you compare secured email versus fax, especially now that everybody go paperless? You actually receive the fax in an email.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that there are different
Yes.
legislature regarding hacking internet versus hacking the phone line.
Sure.
But if you transmit the fax electronically to email anyway.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Here's my view on that. What you think you do by faxing something, over plain old telephone lines and things like that, the idea that it really does convert to ones and zeros, it travels various places and it gets reassembled on the other end. And that doesn't mean that it can't be intercepted and put back together by somebody who's fairly sophisticated. But there's a needle in a haystack, part of this. Somebody's got to know who they're targeting and why they're targeting. They've got to be sophisticated. They've got to have access to lots of kinds of things. And so there is but once you convert things to ones and zeros, they're a whole lot easier to intercept. Now, whether those ones and zeros make sense when you intercept them is a whole nother matter. And so, because there's an entire industry associated with secure packeting and a lot of national security things are very easily accessible, but you can't read them because they're encrypted. There's an encryption that makes it virtually impossible to break. And we have big agencies with lots of smart people that create software to do that. But see, you're differentiating between an appliance and a service. I maintain in cyber the service, while the appliance may change, while it may be I'm going to use my PDA to send that fax, and it'll be treated as a fax in the system, or I have a fax that I dial up a number and send it, or you're differentiating between an appliance and a service. And see, once you get it out of the appliance, then it becomes an element of service and how it's handled. And so it's vulnerable no matter what, depending. Sir.
Tim Stanley, Continental Airlines.
Yes, sir.
The government is supposed to...
What do you do for Continental, if I might ask?
Director of IT Security.
Yes, sir.
The government is supposed to be in the best interest of the public, so to speak. With the new U.S. Cyber Command having been stood up, what's your thoughts on the joint or dual-hatted between NSA and the U.S. Cyber Command that's supposed to cover all services?
Okay. That's a very pointed...
What's your thought of General Alexander leading that effort?
Okay. First, a bit of disclosure. Keith and I are good friends. Okay. We grew up together in the flag officer ranks, so I've known him for a long time, and I've got a lot of respect for him. And there's probably no more individual qualified to in fact run that command currently in uniform. Okay, but we've got some social things we need to ask ourselves. Are we comfortable with the U.S. military doing something? See, we make this big deal about, U.S. military protects America. We actually protect our interests other places. We have drawn this very, very straight line, which I, as a military man for over three decades, understand very, very well. We don't, except under martial law, we don't do military things within the United States or to U.S. citizens. Keith Alexander understands that very well, as do, I'm sure, the thousands of folks that work in that part of the intelligence community. So we're stuck with a tough question here. Do you want to turn to those most capable and qualified to work in an area that you've not trusted those most capable and qualified to work in previously? Are there different firewalls we need to stand up? It is probably not common knowledge when we talk about Cyber Command. The Cyber Command is a joint command. There are 10 other joint commands in the United States military. We vest lethal authority in a combatant commander. We do not invest lethal authority in the services of the Army, Air Force, and Navy. They only organize, train, and equip. There are only 10 people in the United States who have lethal authority under the command of the president. Okay, so that's a joint command. I happen to believe that within 10 years, cyber will be on a par of national importance with diplomatic, economic, and military power. And so I think it's past due for the United States military to start thinking in those terms and developing people with insight and technological understanding in this domain. So I see that as a very good thing. Now, you can say, oh yeah, you were a general and you in the Air Force, and you're the pot calling the kettle black. There is no other place in America that's got that kind of expertise. We just need to figure out how to utilize and best leverage that expertise for America. And if nothing, our military officer corps is about as law-abiding as you get. And so we've again got to come up with ways in which we can do that. If I might digress, you gave me a little bit of an opening. Many of you are probably aware of the FISA discussions. Okay, FISA stands for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which was just repassed again in early 2008. And this is where cyber has blurred kinds of things and made things more difficult. The Act says that our intelligence community can collect information electronically on our enemies. Okay, so if an extremist in Afghanistan were talking on a phone to an extremist in Iran, that seems like a clear case in which that's covered underneath that authority for the United States military to try and intercept that communication and use it for intelligence purposes. But 90% of those calls between Afghanistan and Iran go through a U.S.-owned ISP. Ergo comes the blurring of, oh, wait a minute, it's going through something U.S.-owned, this intelligence community can't collect on it. Now, wait a minute, this is a bad guy in Pakistan and a bad guy in Iran, and they're going to do bad stuff and kill Americans, and you say we can't do something. See, so that was the tension that was behind all of the falderall of, listening in on how often my mom calls her for a hair appointment and stuff like that. I mean, she actually won't. I don't want people knowing how often I get my hair done. Mom, nobody's listening about how many times you call. But it was a very serious thing. And as you can imagine, there are gray areas in which people on the military side would view it one way, and people on, I'll just call them on individual civil rights side, might see it otherwise. But those gray areas were fairly narrow. There was wide acceptance on either side of this is completely off limits and this is completely on limits. But again, cyberspace ended up with dichotomies that did not have easy resolutions. Okay, we're going to have those same things with Cyber Command, Department of Defense, and things. Remember when I first started out, I said we've adopted much of the language from the military, in part because of DARPA and the ARPANET and those kinds of things, because it was where it came from. The people that first started thinking about this wore uniform or smocks and worked for DOD. And we're going to have the same kind of issues. And just because we're going to have the issues is no reason to avoid it, the inevitability, in my view. We need that discussion. We need to, as a society, lay out what we consider acceptable and not acceptable. And I can guarantee you that the United States military will follow it. Okay, can I do two, and I'll keep shorter answers because I've had a hand right here in the middle come up 3 or 4 times without a sir.
Someone was that or run a Hispanic agency in town, and after such serious conversation, I feel silly going back to the grocery store.
See, I got to give you guys something to remember. Orange in a grocery store. My mom's a terrorist. Never mind.
I'm a marketing guy.
Yes, sir.
And I see the value that we can provide to consumers by knowing how many oranges, and the fact that when you bought, club soda, you bought also, what have you.
Sure.
So why? I just want to understand the counter argument, because it has always been confusing to me why people don't want us to know what they buy when we can actually provide better discounts on the stuff that they're going to buy anyway and provide better products. So what is your thinking behind hiding that information?
Well, it is a natural built-in resentment that we as Americans have had since the Revolutionary War, which says that what I do in the confines of my house and what I do on my own time is nobody else's business unless I want to make it their business. And so there ends up being a meeting point of where it's unclear as to whether or not how much you know about my business versus how much you provide in service to me. And see, while Americans are sophisticated on many things, some things we're not. The business about how much Safeway collects and all that kind of good stuff we're probably not very sophisticated on. But we are very sophisticated with regard as to what are personal liberties and such like that. And anytime we see those threatened, there is we got it from our parents and our parents' generations and our parents' generations, because I think and my family is very much a part of this. A bunch immigrants from Europe that wanted to go to some place to where there was less control by the state, more freedom, more liberties, and things like that. And so, one entity's ability to observe and decide and all those kinds of things end up being in conflict with what I want known about me. I don't want people knowing that I buy Borden's milk. I don't want people knowing what drugs I take or what vitamins I buy. Those again, that's very strong personal thoughts with regard to liberty and such. And again, cyberspace is confusing those paradigms and creating these conflicts, just like the business between military and domestic. And I'm very much believe that sticking your head in the sand and saying we've drawn a line and we're done is not the way to look about it. I understand it very much because I have those feelings as well. And sir, you've been very patient. You've had your hand up several times, and you've got the honor or being between us and lunch.
I'm Umesh Verma with Blue Lance Computer Security Software.
Yes, sir.
So, the whole area of cyberspace, for whatever reason, good or bad, conjures up the image of us being the good guys and them being the bad guys.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Cybersecurity becomes about keep the bad guys out.
Right.
Then you move on to another thought that says in the United States of America we've got about 17.5 million businesses that are under 500 employees, and only about less than 10,000 businesses that have over 500 employees.
Yes,
and
sir.
there's a different philosophy, the tolerance of risk.
Yes, sir.
And then you follow that on to a comment that you made, which is that over 70% of the really nasty attacks originate from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested to understand your thoughts going forward as to how do you bring that gap of risk together, and how do you really, what about the protection from the inside out rather than from the outside?
Sure. Well, I spent a lot of time doing this in the intelligence business because counterintelligence is a major part. And again, there's the business of sins of omission and sins of commission. So let's imagine that you've got a small, and by the way, 96% of all business in America is small business, less than 50 employees, 96%. A lot of folks don't realize that. And so I appreciate you quoting those numbers, which reinforce that. And let's say I've got a small business of half a dozen folks. Well, when I make you a part of my small business, if I've got a supply chain, a delivery chain, and a series of things that are highly dependent upon highly leveraged cyber capabilities, Dale's Flower Shop. How do I get flowers? Well, I probably leverage, if I've only got 5 or 6, or me and the truck driver and a couple other folks, I do it through cyber. How do I collect my bills? How do I do my transactions? How do I keep my books? How do I do my accounting? How do I provide audit elements so that I can prove, in some instances I have to prove that I comply with law and those kinds of things. So my half a dozen employees, I cannot afford to have them ignorant about how, and so I spend a lot of time making sure that they understand the ins and outs and can leverage cyber, to the maximum profit. Let's say that a person that I've invested a lot of time in and training and how to access everything I do becomes a disgruntled employee for whatever reason. Either dissatisfied with a fellow worker, home situation, the ownership, whatever. Their intimate knowledge gives them the ability to do some bad things if they want to, if that's how they choose to get retribution. And so there is a science, if you will, about how you deal with employees in that situation. And then the more common case, which is the one that I really think happened with this exposure of the investigation data on Capitol Hill from last week, is that in somebody trying to do their job took an easy shortcut, and because they took an easy shortcut that didn't do the right security, right protection, right whatever, whether they did it out of ignorance or because they wanted to skip some steps and do something fast, because it was an easy shortcut, all of a sudden there was a loss of intellectual property, a violation of privacy, a violation of all kinds of things. Like right now, I don't know. I would like to think that it was a matter of omission rather than somebody did it for a particular thing. That's what I would like to believe. And until I see evidence otherwise, that's my normal approach, that somebody put this out, made it vulnerable, but did so unknowingly, trying to get something else done. Because that's my experience, my military experience, my government experience is that folks were trying to get the job done, and because we either didn't train them right or we gave them tools, beyond what we intended to give them, they made mistakes, which then made us vulnerable. And that's what I see happening with a lot of the small businesses that end up losing intellectual property, getting compromised, having transactions stolen, and things like that. They were preventable things, but for reasons that I cited, ended up doing bad things. Well, let me thank you all for your kind attention. You've definitely been more courteous to me than my students are. You hung around a lot more than my students do, and I sincerely appreciate that. I hope that you maintain your interest in this. This is vitally important to us, I think, as a nation, as a society, as a culture. And we need to make these decisions based upon facts and information, and we need to make them not based on technology. And that's where I believe the crux is. But there are many people, both in the industry I work in and in uniform and in our federal government that have, and many of them are friends of mine, and sometimes we're just as confused as everybody else, but we're working very hard. And so stay tuned, stay involved, and thank you very much from Harris Corporation, from me personally.